Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those in Pacific time zone, and welcome to our webcast, Cybersecurity for Corporate Finance from the Controllers Council. My name is Neil Brown. I'm Executive Director of the Controllers Council. And today I'd like to introduce a very special guest, Jerry Irvine, who is CIO of Prescient Solutions. And Jerry's expertise in cybersecurity is extremely extensive, beginning with his Master of Science in Professional Studies in Cybersecurity and Information Management from George Washington University. Jerry has more certifications than anyone I know, including all these acronyms for cybersecurity and I'm sure he'll talk a bit about that as well. And he also has many partnerships, and this is both Prescient, where he's a partner, Prescient Solutions, and Jerry himself are members of multiple federal cybersecurity organizations, including the FBI InfraGard, the U.S. Secret Service Electronic Crimes Task Force, and the Information Technology Information Sharing and Analysis Center. These organizations provide up-to-date cyber information, including current threats, attackers, and mitigation processes. And last but not least, Jerry's been all over the news. These are just a small portion of some of the interviews, both broadcast and print, from Wall Street to CFO Magazine, the New York Times. He's been on the Today Show, CIO Magazine, USA Today, Inc. I think CSO is Chief Security Officer, if I'm not mistaken. Jerry, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And then Wired. So Jerry, thank you for being a part of our webcast today, and we'll turn it over to Jerry shortly. But first, I want to just go over the agenda, trying to keep it brisk and intense here. Welcome and introductions we've handled. Jerry will say a little bit about himself before he gets started on common risks and vulnerabilities, on 2020 cyber attacks, on cyber compliance requirements, which is very important to the C-suite and CFOs and controllers, cybersecurity strategies, and then we'll get into questions and answers. And here a little housekeeping. I'd like you to use your all attendees use your GoToWebinar control panel to ask questions early, and we'll answer as many as possible. And then we're gonna, Jerry will turn it back to me to tell you a little bit about the Controllers Council and some upcoming dates and announcements. We also have a special promotion, membership promotion that we'll mention toward the end as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jerry Irvine.
Thank you, Neil. So we're going to discuss the different issues that are existing out there today in cybersecurity. And the thing that always comes to mind is no matter how hard you work and how many different technologies you implement, how many great security experts you have, you're only as good as that one person who's going to click on a ransomware. You're only as good as that one server that doesn't have the most current up-to-date patch on it. The average company today does not actually even have a security team. They have IT professionals, and all these IT guys are doing every morning when they get in is putting out fires. They're looking and checking the different systems that are out there to make sure that they're updated, doing software updates, adding users, deleting users, and everything that they can to keep the systems up to date and secure. And unfortunately, it's just not enough. So what happens in many cases is, especially the small to mid-sized organizations, people just quit. They just they quit doing it, and they do as minimal task as they possibly can. So we have to make sure that we look at all of our security measures and we bake security in from the very beginning, not throwing it in at the end, because otherwise we're just going to be unsecured. So the thing that always amazes me is the more things change, the more they stay the same. If I were to ask anybody out there, what do you think the most common threat is, we would all say it. Everybody would say passwords. And you'd be right. Stolen and reused passwords, weak passwords, are the biggest issue. As a matter of fact, over 80% of all breaches that occur out there are as a result of a password theft, either because of a reused password. Somebody has 5 passwords that they just go over and over and over again, or because they used a weak password and the hackers were able to do a brute force. There's so many utilities out there to do brute force today, applications like Cain and Abel and Morpheus and different things that are out there, that it's easy for a hacker to go in and break a password today. Passwords, how do they steal passwords? How do they get your information? Generally through phishing scams. Phishing scams are emails in many cases, but can also be phone calls. Just an example, my father got a phone call from a guy claiming to be Windows, not Microsoft, Windows, and said, we see that your systems are doing something bad, and I need to get on your system. Now, I do work with the FBI, with the Secret Service, with the Department of Homeland Security. My father knows what I do, and yet he let this guy get on his computer. And in a matter of 5 seconds before he realized he shouldn't have done that and he pulled the plug on it, the system was already pawned, completely taken over. Phishing is a result in over 91, or is the beginning in over 91% of all hacks that are out there, whether it is via email or social engineering. There's a website out there called knowbefore.com. Kevin Midnick, who is a well-renowned cybersecurity expert, runs this. It has a lot of great training information and phishing information, ransomware information. If you haven't gone to that website, go to it. It can help you out and help you do training for your people inside. Now, phishing emails cause over 2/3 of all ransomware infections. Ransomware right now is occurring every 40 seconds. So by the time we get done with our presentation today, there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of ransomware attacks that have occurred. By the end of this year, they're estimating that will be over 11 occurring every 11 seconds. And the actual cost of ransomware is moving up from $1 billion a year to $20 billion a year. So why do hackers use ransomware? That's where the money is. And interestingly enough, you think, oh, I'm going to get hit by ransomware once, I'll never get hit again because I'm going to learn. That's not the case. Even the large companies out there like Pitney Bowes or the city of Baltimore, Maryland, even Microsoft and Cisco have been hit multiple times with ransomware. So it's important that we train our users and that we implement tools and services to detect and protect us from these attacks. Cloud computing has been a panacea for companies to say, I don't need IT anymore. I don't need IT security. I don't need systems. And as a result, companies were flocking to cloud computing, and they were going out there with unrealistic expectations that they'll never have to have an IT guy again, that they're not going to have to manage their systems, and that they're all going to be managed and secured for them. That nothing could be farther from the truth. When you put your systems in the cloud, all you're doing is putting your application out there or putting your hardware out there. You still have to manage it. You still have to control it, and you are still responsible. And unfortunately, when organizations have gone out to the cloud, they haven't understood that. As a result, systems are configured improperly. User IDs and passwords are not set appropriately. If you have Microsoft Office 365 and you're using email out there, you can have users that don't have passwords. It's your requirement, your responsibility to set the security measures. So setting up the configurations, setting up the security practices is all your responsibility. Over 62% of the people that are using the cloud right now know that they have misconfigured systems out there. And over 51% of them have been exposed at least once. As a matter of fact, cloud computing has become a huge target for hackers. Why did the criminals, why did they go to the bank? Because that's where the money is. Why do hackers go to cloud computing? Because that's where the data is. Databases are huge and they have more access. And almost half of the databases that are out there have no encryption at all. So when we go out into the cloud, we have to make sure that we take the same responsibility for those systems that we had when the systems were internal in order to take care of them. Gartner is saying 95% of the cloud security failures out there have been the customer's fault. Again, that's because the customers have unrealistic expectations that everything is going to be taken care of for them. Go on the next slide there. Neil?
I've got Internet of Things. New slide.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Sorry. It took a second to refresh. We need an IT guy to look at that. Okay. So here's another big one that's just occurred in the last few years. Everybody has some type of Internet of Things on their network or industrial Internet of Things, SCADA devices, PLC controllers. These devices have been around since the 1940s. And unfortunately, since the 1940s, not much has changed about them. Data is still unencrypted as they communicate on them. And they're extremely easy to hack. The biggest issue with all of this is that there's so many things today that are connected to the internet that you don't even know what they all are. There are internet controllable coffee pots and toasters and refrigerators. I've gone into cafeterias at different manufacturing plants where they just bought a new refrigerator and has the pretty little screen on the front of the refrigerator so they can put messages on there. What they don't realize is that's connected to the internet. It's going right through their firewall, and it has no antivirus solution for it. It has no protection for it, and it's not being monitored or looked at as an endpoint. And as a result, is a potential for a hacker to get into their internal network. People go, well, that really doesn't happen. If you guys all remember the Target hack, Target was hacked by a weakness in their heating and air conditioning company's systems. So it was a PLC controller on their heating and air conditioner that the hacker got into and was able to get to their database. These Internet of Controls devices or Internet of Things devices out there are being breached on average over 5,000 times a month. So you add in all of the thermostats, you add in all of your printers, all of your fax machines, all of these different things that have internet on them, they're being penetration tested, they're being scanned 5,000 times or more a month each. The number one devices that are being hacked out there or being attacked out there are routers, because they're on the outside of your firewall. So hackers try to get into your internet through your, or into your internal network through your internet routers, but also your security cameras. The security cameras are one of the easiest things to get into, because again, they generally are not encrypted. By default, the passwords are admin and password, or admin and admin, and some of them you don't even have the opportunity to change the password. So these Internet of Things devices are extremely vulnerable. If we have them, we should put them on separate segment, and get them away from your network. But we have to understand that these little things have a chip about the size of the top of your little finger. And there's just no place in those little chips for security. As a result, we have to provide security and other measures. Okay? Cyber attacks. The number of cyber attacks that occurred last year is astronomical. It's over 141% increase from 2019. They had over 37 billion records were stolen. That's the most ever. Over 600 of those were as a result of ransomware, and 5 of them made up for 5 billion, or about 20% of the total number of hacks that were out there. The other 18, another 18 of them were between 100 million and a billion. So again, this ransomware and the cyber attacks that are occurring are becoming larger and larger. A lot of that has to do with the fact that these things are in the cloud, and databases are becoming larger. And unfortunately, the misconfigurations in these cloud environments are making our networks extremely vulnerable. One of the most victimized sector, as we all know, is healthcare, especially with the pandemic that has been going on. Over 12% of all the breaches that have been reported have been healthcare. And I've had people say, well, you know, it's their medical information. It's not really financial information. So, you know, how bad is it? Well, the fact that it's medical information that is specific to these individuals, hackers use that to spearfish and send specific emails in regards to medical conditions, or as a result of some type of family information, and they're able to monetize those phishing scams, and that's how they're making their money. Other types of attacks that are occurring are the denial of service, or distributed denial of service. If you remember, back in 2019, in October of 2019, there was a huge denial of service attack that brought down many of the financial institutions out there, as you know, including American Express and Chase and some large, you know, banks. That was done via the Mariah botnet, and what these botnets do is, or are made of, is typically Internet of Things devices. So TVs, cameras, any type of Internet of Things device. As a matter of fact, in that hack that occurred in 2019, the bulk of the devices that were out there were smart TVs and cameras, and they were what was bringing down banks in these large environments. So again, people say, well, it was a disruption in service, but how bad is that? These denial of service attacks are not just to cause a nuisance. What they do is they are used by hackers to define weaknesses in the network. So by looking at all of the traffic that's going to them, they'll see specific firewalls or routers that are not responding quickly. And as a result, they can attack those devices as they're trying to fend off these denial of service attacks and actually gain access to them that gives them control and the ability to get into the internal network. So denial of service attacks are not just a nuisance, they're designed to allow hackers to gain access to your environment. So cyber attacks are hitting everybody. Health insurance or health industries, as we discussed. What's also interesting is industrial and engineering companies and manufacturing companies are being hit with ransomware as well. And these are being done not necessarily to gain financially from them, but rather to gain intellectually. China, Russia, even a lot of the South American countries are using ransomware to gather user IDs and things so that they can then go in and steal intellectual property of the different companies that they're hacking. We had a situation with a automobile parts manufacturer in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, that they called us and said, well, you know, we don't know what happened. We just increased our internet to 100 meg worth of bandwidth, 10 times the speed, and it's slower than it's ever been. We went out there and found that the Chinese had hacked into their network, and once they increased their bandwidth to 100 meg, it actually gave the Chinese the ability to download all of their blueprints and their IP even faster. We were able to stop it, but unfortunately it had been going on for so long that within 6 months, this company was out of business because China was flooding the market with their products. So there are different reasons for hackers to go out and hit different industries. So this is kind of an overall look at the different records and types of records that are being stolen and targeted. And then, you know, from the times this past year that they occurred. At this point in time, there were only 20 billion records exposed. Think about that. 20 billion ends up now it's over 37 billion. And by the end of this year, they're saying it could be almost another 150% increase. Hackers aren't going away. So what has government done to try to help us in managing the risks that are out there? And unfortunately, what they've done is they've made more regulations, more compliance rules, and things that you have to adhere to. This is just a sampling of 4 that are specific to the financial sector: SOX, PCI, bank secrecy, GLBA, but you also have HIPAA, you have FISMA, you have, you know, depending on what organizations you are, you can be regulated to death. And these compliance requirements pretty much all have the same rules and regulations to follow, but unfortunately, organizations have to go in and respond to each of them, fill out each of them, have an audit for each of them, have a separate external auditor for each of them. And as a result, companies, especially small to mid-sized organizations, are being regulated to death. There is a movement out there that is trying to make a single standard for IT and cyber regulations or compliance. I don't know that we'll see it in our lifetime. But these are just some of the regulatory compliance agencies that are out there. In the next slide, we show you what all of these organizations are looking for. So first off, everybody looks at authorization and access controls. Who can use what and how can they gain access, right? So the idea here is we want to enable the principle of least privileges, which says you can only do what you need to do. And to access it, we want to have some type of multi-form factor authentication. A single user ID and password is easy to break. Once you add a second authentication method, it becomes exponentially more difficult. However, some of these things, like a response, a text response as a secondary form of authentication, is proving that it's actually not beneficial at all, because hackers can grab that information and easily respond to that information as well. So uh, these compliance organizations come out and say, okay, you have to have a standard, you have to have some written documentation as to what you're using and why for your authentication and your access control. In data communications, they also tell you you have to encrypt your data. Um, Unfortunately, they don't tell you how to encrypt it or what to use to encrypt it or what standards to use to encrypt it, but they just say you need to encrypt it. And again, um, there are not a lot of companies out there that are doing encryption, because there are still a lot of legacy devices out there that don't support it, or they just don't have the ability to do it. So while encryption is suggested, it is not required in the compliance organizations. The other thing is they say you have to have accessibility, which means disaster recovery, business continuity, fault tolerance. You have to have your systems be accessible at all times. So how do you do that? Well, redundancy. But what they'll also say is, well, your disaster recovery could just be a backup. And many organizations say, okay, that is my DR plan is my backup. And they'll back up to a cloud, or they'll back up to a tape, but they don't do, uh, you know, restores, selective restores throughout the year to make sure these things are working, or they don't estimate the time it's going to take to do a complete restore. We had a company that came to us that had somewhere around 20 terabytes of data that was backed up to the cloud, and their system failed. So they had to do a complete restore, and found out that the 20 terabytes of data to restore over their internet pipe was going to take them about 3 weeks. They would be out of business. So they ended up having to purchase equipment from the backup company to the tunes of around $50,000 worth of hardware that they shipped to them next day, so that they could put it back up and running in place. So again, the compliance agencies out there say you need to have some type of disaster recovery. You need to have accessibility at all times, but they don't give you specifics on why or how you should be doing that. Right. All of the compliance organizations also highly suggest monitoring and alerting. I can't tell you how many multi-billion-dollar companies we go into, and they have no monitoring solution, or very limited monitoring solutions out there. Protecting your environment is key. You have to have things in place to protect you from getting hacked, but you also have to realize everybody gets hacked. Microsoft just got hacked this past week, and all government institutions out that are connected to them were breached as a result of this. So Microsoft gets hacked, you cannot expect that you're not going to be hacked. So if you can't protect, the next most important thing is detect. Monitoring and alerting the environment will allow you to detect your environment and detect anomalies that are going on. Is your network slower than it has been in the past? Are you seeing lots of failed logins? Are you seeing errors within your system? This monitoring and alerting, even if it's not a security monitoring, gives you a lot of information that you can then use to respond to a potential breach. Um, Probably the biggest section in every compliance organization is the policies, processes, and standards section. Says you have to have written policies, you have to have written processes and written standards. Um, Unfortunately, again, that written policy, and I've seen it in many cases, they have a written policy that says they are not doing intrusion detection, okay, because their systems don't allow for it, or their process for password management is, assigning everybody a password, and instead of requiring complex passwords and things of that nature. So as long as it's written, in many cases it will allow the environment to continue and to be compliant. Um, Network security parameters, they always say you should have an intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system, or a firewall. Now, firewalls today, in many situations, have what we call a poor man's intrusion detection system. Basically, it's just a log alert. So if something happens, uh, they get an alert. So organizations say we have IDS, it's built into our firewall. That's not an IDS. And the truth of the matter is IDS, intrusion detection systems, are obsolete. It's now the newer versions are IPS, prevention systems, which includes detection, but also it goes further and allows you to actually block traffic um, when it seems to be untoward. Again, organizations that have intrusion prevention systems that I've been to very rarely have them turned on, because if your intrusion prevention system is on and it's not done exactly right, it will prevent good traffic or give you false positives. And as a result, your network will not work properly. So rather than fixing it and doing it right, they simply turn it off, but they can still say, we have intrusion prevention systems. Physical security, in many situations when we go out, we'll find the computer room has a key and lock in it, as opposed to some type of code entry system that is being monitored and checked. Very little organizations, or few organizations, have video and motion detection in their computer rooms. Um, these are all things that are suggested, but they just want to know what is your physical security in your environment. And then the segregation of duties. Um, this is interesting because this is usually only looked at when it comes to application development or database management. They don't want a specific user to be able to do every single part of a transaction, or for a programmer to be able to install a system, check the system, and update the system all on their own, because they can put in bad code that allows them to, gather money and do things. So those are good, that they limit the ability for this uh, transaction to be end to end. But what they don't realize is the average IT person has an administrative user ID that allows them to see everything on the entire network. So we had a situation where a disgruntled client who had administrative user IDs went into the owner's files and got all of the owners and executives' salaries and published them. There needs to be the implementation of least privilege, right? The principle of least privilege is so that A user can only do what they need to do. If an administrator has to have rights to maintain and back up the system, that's fine. But when they're done doing those tasks, they have to log out and log in with their own user IDs. And monitoring the activity with administrative accounts is the way to enforce that. But again, these things are not required with the compliance agencies. So this is why being compliant really doesn't mean much. Many companies out there have been compliant and were still hacked. Target was 100% compliant, but they were hacked by their HVAC system, a supply chain. Equifax, when Equifax was hacked, come on, they're the king of compliance, right? But hackers stole reused passwords from their employees. They were able to get passwords from other websites and then kept attempting to use those user IDs and passwords until they got into the Equifax system. Marriott, 100% compliant. They were hacked by weaknesses in one of their supply chains, Starwood. Hartman, hackers did scans on their database server and found known vulnerabilities. Now, one of the compliance requirements is having system updates and patches and things implemented, making sure that you do that. Unfortunately, this was a legacy database server that was out there and had all the updates on it, but there was still a known vulnerability and hackers were able to get into it. And in Microsoft, an unknown server vulnerability was out there this past week, and hackers were able to get into it. All of these organizations are compliant. Hackers are still able to get into them. So how do you prevent this, right? What's the biggest thing? Truthfully, 80% of the cyber attacks that have occurred out there can be stopped just by the implementation of best practices. And those best practices come in the form of frameworks. We go to the next slide. A couple of the frameworks that are out there. NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they developed a cybersecurity framework about 5 years ago. I actually happened to be on the team with some of the people that were developing that, and it has provided a wealth of information for organizations of all size on how to secure their environment. Again, it's a matter of giving recommendations and best practices and then implementing the appropriate technology to enable those. FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, they have a small firm cybersecurity checklist. If you use this link, it will actually take you to a Excel spreadsheet that has something like 20 different sheets within it. And this says small firm cybersecurity checklist, I would question as to any organization that would not be able to use this checklist. If you go through it, it asks questions and requires implementation and documentation in order to help you secure your environment. This does a number of things. First off, both of these frameworks provide you with the policies, processes, and standards section of any compliance organization. You fill these things out, you have all your documentation, which is a good reason to do it. But more importantly, by filling this out, you now have a better understanding of your environment. You know what your weaknesses are so that you can address them. And when there is a problem, your security team and IT staff have a roadmap to go into to look and say, okay, what is the potential? What were the risks that were out there? How are we going to be able to fix this? So it's extremely important to fill this stuff out. So these cybersecurity frameworks, that three categories that both of these go into, and actually there's multiple frameworks out there. ISO has one, CIS, the Center for Internet Security, has one, COBIT, Control Objectives for Information Related Technology. They provide different frameworks. Whichever one you want to use, but get one of them, document it, fill it out. And the biggest categories in all of these are protection, detection, and response or recover. So again, as we discussed before, implementing the tools to protect your environment is a critical stage. But we also have to understand, no matter what we do, no matter how much money we spend, and how brilliant our technicians are, hackers out there are going to be smarter and have the ability to get in. So as important, if not more important than protection, is detection. Finding the system as soon as you can. On average today, companies are taking over 190 days to detect and identify a data breach. 190 days. And almost 70 days after that to contain the breach. So that's pretty close to a year. I mean, that's 2/3 of a year to identify and contain the breach. And this is companies of all size and stature, not just the large ones. So hackers are out there hitting everybody. And really, small to mid-sized organizations are becoming even larger targets because, again, they have their stuff in the cloud. They don't have the technology or the resources to manage it appropriately and configure it appropriately. And as a result, they're getting hacked. Right? So, next slide. Identify. So identifying your mission critical devices is extremely important. Pretty much people tell me, well, everything we have is important. And I get it. But if everything's important, then nothing's important, right? So what we need to do is define not only the things that are important, but who has access to everything. If you can go out and do nothing but find out all your key or your privileged access users, your administrative and super users that are out there, that is the first step to tightening down your environment. And there are tools out there that allow you to do it. CyberArk is an amazing tool that will go out and scan your entire environment, tell you who the super users are. This Vault, Microsoft Azure's Active Directory, if you're a Microsoft shop, all of these will allow you to get privileged access users to find the guys that are out there that could cause you the most problems. Okay. Next slide is protection. Okay, to protect yourself, the National Cybersecurity Committee has come up with a 7-step process for effective defense, and we'll go through these. Next page. Whitelisting and security solutions. All right. 3 years ago now, McAfee was being interviewed on television and shocked the heck out of everybody, saying antivirus is dead. No, antivirus doesn't do any good anymore. Only 30% of the known viruses that are out there today are being caught by antivirus. Of the known viruses, what about the ones that aren't known? Okay, antivirus solutions just can't keep up with it. So what do you need to do? You need to look at a new endpoint security solution. These are the 3 leading industries that are out there right now, industry leaders: Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, and SentinelOne. CrowdStrike is the only one that I know of that has yet to be hacked. The others have had some type of hacking issues on their own environments. CrowdStrike does a amazing job at resolution and remediation as well. So does Carbon Black. But these are suites of applications. They include antivirus, but then they also include detection and forensics and stuff, and all kinds of tools that you can use to protect your environment. Next slide. Okay, configuration management. Over 50% of the hacks that have occurred on cloud computing environments has been as a result of misconfiguration or improper management. Everybody knows that, and actually the Department of Homeland Security says the number one thing that you have to do, right? First off, have antivirus, but secondly, do your system updates. Microsoft provides you a free server, the WSUS server, Windows Server Update Services, to update all of your devices. GFI and Manage Engine are other tools that are out there to allow you to update third-party applications. It's extremely critical to update your applications. Adobe and different types of virtual applications are the most or are the easiest to hack, because you get into a virtual environment, you get a shell, and now you can gain access to the entire server. So implementing patch management solutions and making sure that you are not using old legacy applications. Windows XP is no longer supported. Windows 2003 is no longer supported. These applications out there, if you're still using them, there's no patches. Hackers know what the vulnerabilities are. They're going to find them and they're going to hack you. Okay. Once you do configure your devices, you want to make sure that you stay on top of them and that they're being configured appropriately. Puppet and Chef are two of the best that are out there. If you're a Microsoft environment, Microsoft System Center also has some configuration management solutions that allow you to manage your Microsoft environment. Then the next thing is, once you've got your configurations, once you've got your patch management in place, now for your checks and balances, you want to perform scans against those to make sure that your standards are working. Qualys, although they were just hacked last week, is a vulnerability assessment tool. Rapid7 and Nessus. Nessus was the very first vulnerability assessment scanner that was ever developed. It still has a great tool. Rapid7 is also a wonderful tool. It will scan anything with an IP address. So your phones, your printers, your coffee pots, those refrigerators that are in your cafeteria, they have an IP address, they're going to get scanned. Cisco telephones, when they first were put out, they had known vulnerabilities in them that allowed hackers to gain access to them and then gain access to your network. A firmware update was required. That's the case with many IT products that you get. When you get them, they have to be updated. And the average IT guy opens a box, turns them on, and puts them on the shelf. They have old firmware, old iOS on them. They need to be updated. These tools will help you define all of those that need to be updated. Next. So the other thing is reducing your attack surface area. So how do you do that? You segment your network. All IT tools today or devices today allow for what's called a VLAN, a virtual local area network. Heck, the little switches and stuff that you buy at Best Buy for your home even allow you to do VLANs. So you can segment those really vulnerable Internet of Things devices, PLC controllers, SCADA devices, so that they're on their own network and can't be accessed from the internet. VoIP solutions, your phone system should not be on the same network as the rest of your systems because they're extremely chatty and they can bring your system down and cause, again, more problems. So segmenting your environment increases your ability to control and decreases the potential for malicious activity. The other thing is, encryption. We said before, compliance agencies are looking for encryption. VPN is a virtual private network. With all of the remote users that have been working in this past year because of the pandemic, um, the VPN is become very important. Unfortunately, the average user is not using a VPN, so we should be implementing VPNs for everything, even VPN on internal communications. Okay, we're running a little long. I've been told we got to go on. Authentication and access controls. So again, single form factor authentication is going to cause you problems. You have to have multi-form factor. Just using a text to say you've logged in is not good enough. Microsoft has tools. Google has tools. Use a multiple form factor authentication, biometrics, a fob, something of that nature. Also, if your users are fired, quit, whatever, are no longer around, disable the user account. People say, well, I want to leave it open so that we can gather their data. Yeah, well, somebody's going to know that user ID and password. Require password changes. And then on the other, at the very end, I mentioned this multiple times, the principles of least privilege. If you don't do something, don't give, if your user doesn't do something, don't give them access to do it. All right. Limit the access controls that they have. Right. Next. All right. Secure protocols. Again, we discussed VPN. Limiting your users, especially remote users, from being able to use, you know, publicly accessible Wi-Fi, or even their Wi-Fi at their own home if it's not secured from every other device on their network. This is another reason to use VPN. Inside your network, there's also the ability to just have your switches encrypt traffic that's going across your network, so that if somebody puts a sniffer on it, they can't see your data. There's software out there in ransomware that sniffs the network and sends every information. That's how Target was hacked. A sniffer was put on the network via their HVAC system, and passwords, privileged passwords to their database were received. So encryption is really becoming very important. It was not done very often in the past because hardware just didn't have the ability to keep up with it. But today, your hardware is very powerful and it can be done. All right. Last one, number 7, monitor and respond. So there's all kinds of monitoring applications out there today. Things like What's Up Gold, or really anything is better than nothing. Unfortunately, the average company does not use it, or if they are using something, they're only monitoring 3 or 4 devices. Today, you can monitor every single device on your network. There are tools out there that will monitor the connectivity of your workstations to determine if they have a virus or not. To look at the different things that are going on. CrowdStrike's endpoint security solution monitors everything, all of the traffic going in and out of every single device, to tell you what's going on. So implementing a detailed, proactive monitoring solution is going to allow you to not only detect, but also to recover extremely quickly, as opposed to waiting 194 days or 2/3 of a year. All right. Types of solutions that are out there for monitorings: What's Up Gold, SolarWinds, Spiceworks. WebSense is an excellent tool. Used to be just a web application filtering tool, but now they also monitor all of the individual workstations. And again, some endpoint security solutions have monitoring implemented in them as well. And I think that's it.
So here are some references that Jerry has shared that will be in the presentation. By the way, the presentation will be available to everyone emailed over in the next 24 hours. Jerry, go take this one away.
Yeah, so if you guys would like us to do a initial discovery, what we will do is implement some monitoring tools, scanning tools that would go out and look at a few of your mission critical devices to determine if they have their updates, if there's any known vulnerabilities, things of that nature. If you want to give us a call, send me an email is actually better, and I will have our Matt Sagi, our business coordinator, get a hold of you, and we'll be happy to start up an initial discovery. After that, we may decide that it'd be good for you to do a system and infrastructure assessment where we come out and assess your entire environment.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jerry. So let's get on to some Q&A. We've got a few minutes left here. Here's an easy one. Should every company have a penetration test done?
So penetration tests are great. They will, so the difference between a vulnerability scan, which will simply go out there and scan all of your devices to determine if there is a known vulnerability or a configuration issue that's occurring. In a penetration test, they actually will then, once they've determined the vulnerabilities, attempt to breach it using that vulnerability. The penetration tests are great in a financial environment. However, if you don't have a production and a test environment, if everything you have is production, you don't want to have a penetration test done, because if they hack you, and they will, you could lose data or your systems could be brought down. So you want to have a duplicate environment that is 100% replicated from your production, and allow that to have the penetration done on it. Doing a penetration test on your production environment is dangerous and could cause you a lot of heartache.
Okay, we have another question from the audience. What are your thoughts on cybersecurity insurance policies, and what coverage would be suggested?
So, unfortunately, after all of the social engineering and stuff started happening a few years ago, companies started limiting the different types of coverage that exist. Cybersecurity or cyber liability insurance and cybersecurity insurance, in many cases, does not include social engineering. So if you, and I think cyber insurance is important, but you also want to make sure that in your cyber insurance, it includes phishing scams and social engineering, because you know, if a hacker sends you a link and then you click on it, that click is doing something that it's supposed to be doing. So that's not covered under your insurance. So unless you get the fraud, basically it's cyber fraud insurance, you know, just getting hacked is not going to be covered. So cyber insurance is important. Make sure you have the cyber fraud insurance with it as well.
Excellent. And here's a kind of an outlook question. Clearly, you mentioned that you've demonstrated that cyber attacks are increasing substantially over time and expected to increase more. Will there be a breakthrough, a new technology in combating cyber attacks?
Well, and there already are. There are many artificial intelligent applications. As I mentioned, as CrowdStrike has an automated detection and remediation solution now, that once they find a new hybrid virus or a new malicious activity, it immediately gets entered into their system, and everybody that has their system internationally within milliseconds is protected against it. So those tools are becoming more and more prevalent, and there are a lot of companies out there that are now putting in automated functions to do that. So yeah, there's things that are happening. Unfortunately, for everything that we do, the hackers have a counterpunch. I mean, look at it. Ransomware has actually gone down. The number of ransomware occurrences has actually gone down in this past year, but the number of breaches resulting from ransomware has increased by over 140%. So they're doing less, but being more effective at doing it. So again, for everything we do, they're coming back with their own counterpunch.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jerry. And let me just wrap up quickly with some Controllers Council background information. We're a national community of accounting and corporate finance professionals. Here are some key links: the main website, our events page, and our membership features. We have a membership promotion associated with this webcast for Cyber 30 to get 30% off annual membership, and that expires at the end of this month. So let's look at some upcoming announcements and save the dates. We have a Controller of the Year Awards. Registration is free, and those awards will remain open for another month or so. We have, well, that's today's webcast on cybersecurity, travel and expense management automation on March 18. And in April, we have a fun webcast with some of our board members debating C-suite debate on jargon, buzzwords, and acronyms. So that trying to add some entertainment value here as well. All of our webcasts are archived and recorded and on our events page as well as our video page. So please look there. I want to thank everyone today, our attendees, our registrants, and most importantly, Prescient Solutions, who have brought Jerry Irvine to us today. And Prescient is a leading IT engineering and cybersecurity services firm that's based in Chicago and works with small, medium, and large companies and governments as well across the US. So thank you, everyone, and greatest success in 2021, and hopefully some of the insight that Jerry shared with you today will help you avoid some of these awful cyber attacks that are permeating the world today. So thanks again, and great luck to all. Goodbye.